At midnight, this was a disorganized mess of clouds. Assistant meteorologists were watching, but not worried about. By 4 a.m., it was something else entirely. A tightening eye, a pressure drop that made forecasters sit up in their chairs, and a wind field that expanded almost 50 miles in 6 hours. Right now, as you're watching this, emergency managers in 3 counties are opening their operations centers. Sirens are being tested, and millions of people are about to wake up to a very different storm than the one they went to bed worrying about. This is what rapid intensification looks like from the inside. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this storm turned into a monster overnight, what happens in the next 12 hours, and why the next forecast update might be the most important one of the entire season. Let's get into it. 24 hours ago, nobody was panicking. Satellite loops showed a loosely wrapped area of low pressure, what meteorologists call a tropical disturbance, drifting lazily over warm, open water. Convection was patchy. Thunderstorms would flare up near the center, then collapse an hour later. There was no defined eye, no symmetry, just a smear of clouds that looked, frankly, unimpressive. Forecast models disagreed wildly. Some showed the system fizzling out within 48 hours. Others hinted, quietly, almost as a footnote, at the possibility of rapid strengthening if the atmosphere lined up just right. Most viewers, most residents, most local news broadcasts barely mentioned it. It was the kind of system you'd glance at on a weather app and scroll past. But underneath that unimpressive surface, 3 ingredients were quietly assembling. And when all 3 come together at once, meteorologists have a name for it. The perfect setup for explosive intensification. The first ingredient was sea surface temperature. The water beneath this system wasn't just warm, it was exceptionally warm, sitting several degrees above the seasonal average, with that warmth extending unusually deep beneath the surface. That matters more than people realize. A storm doesn't just skim heat off the top few feet of ocean. As it churns the water beneath it, it pulls up whatever's down there. If cooler water sits just below the surface, a storm can effectively cool its own fuel supply and stall out. But when the warmth extends deep, 60, 80, 100 feet down, the storm can churn and keep finding fuel. It's the difference between a campfire with a thin layer of dry kindling and one sitting on top of a buried reserve of dry timber. The second ingredient was wind shear, or rather the lack of it. Wind shear is the change in wind speed and direction with height, and it is, in almost every case, the enemy of a strengthening storm. High shear rips a storm's structure apart before it can organize, tilting the circulation and exposing the low-level center to dry, hostile air. But overnight, the upper-level winds relaxed. A ridge of high pressure shifted into position exactly where forecasters didn't want it to, creating a zone of near-dead calm in the upper atmosphere directly above the storm. With shear values dropping into the single digits, the storm suddenly had the structural stability to build a true symmetric core, and that's exactly what it started doing. The third ingredient was moisture. Specifically, mid-level relative humidity, which had been marginal the day before, spiked as a plume of tropical moisture fed directly into the system from the south. Dry air is a storm killer. It gets ingested into the circulation and evaporates the very thunderstorms trying to build the eye wall. But with that dry air pushed aside and replaced by a saturated, humid environment, every thunderstorm that fired near the center had the fuel to survive, strengthen, and wrap tighter around a common axis. Warm water, low shear, high moisture. Individually, none of these is rare. Together, on the same night, over the same patch of ocean, that's the combination hurricane hunters and forecast meteorologists dread, because it's the recipe for a storm to transform faster than warnings can keep pace with it. Meteorologists define rapid intensification as an increase in maximum sustained winds of at least 35 miles per hour within a 24-hour period. It's a specific, measurable threshold. Not just a subjective sense that a storm got worse. And overnight, the system didn't just meet that threshold, it blew past it. At the evening advisory, sustained winds were estimated in the mid-40-mile range, a moderate tropical storm unremarkable by hurricane standards. By the pre-dawn advisory, winds had climbed into hurricane strength. That's not a gradual climb. That's a system doubling down on itself hour after hour, each round of thunderstorms building on the structural gains of the last. Satellite imagery told the story better than any statistic could. At sunset, the storm looked ragged, with convection scattered unevenly around a poorly defined center. By 2 a.m., a central dense overcast had formed. A solid shield of high, cold cloud tops completely obscuring the center from view, a hallmark of a storm rapidly consolidating its structure. By 4 a.m., that overcast had thinned at its core just enough to reveal something forecasters look for with a mix of awe and dread, a pinhole eye, small, ragged, but unmistakably present. A storm doesn't develop an eye by accident. An I means the storm has built an internal engine efficient enough to sustain a core of sinking, calm air surrounded by a wall of the most violent winds it will produce. Hurricane Hunter aircraft, dispatched the moment satellite trends suggested something was happening, flew directly into the system overnight and confirmed what the imagery hinted at. Flight level winds were running well above what surface estimates alone would have suggested. Central pressure, the single number meteorologists watch most closely because a falling pressure almost always means a strengthening storm, had dropped several millibars in just a few hours. Drop sonde readings, the instrument. Packages released from the aircraft that fall through the storm and radio back data in real time confirmed a well-organized wind field wrapping tightly around an increasingly defined core. By the time the sun came up, this was no longer the sloppy, disorganized system that had been easy to dismiss the day before. It had a name people were starting to say with real concern in their voices. It had an eye. It had a forecast cone that had narrowed and shifted overnight, putting a very specific stretch of coastline squarely in the crosshairs. Rapid intensification is, without question, one of the most dangerous phenomena in modern weather forecasting. Not because the storms themselves are unprecedented, but because of the timing problem it creates. Evacuation orders, shelter openings, supply runs, boarding up windows, all of that takes time. Emergency management plans are typically built around a slower, more gradual escalation. A tropical storm today, maybe a Category 1 tomorrow, a further strengthening the day after that. Rapid intensification breaks that timeline entirely. It compresses what would normally be a 72-hour decision window into something closer to 12 or 18 hours. That compression is exactly what's playing out along the coastline right now. Local officials who, 12 hours ago, were monitoring the situation with mild interest are now activating emergency operation centers. Coastal counties are opening shelters ahead of schedule. Grocery stores are seeing the familiar rush on water, batteries, and non-perishable food that always precedes a storm, except this time, residents have had far less warning than usual to make those decisions. There's also a deeper, more unsettling pattern here that goes beyond any single storm. Climate researchers have been tracking an increase in the frequency of rapid intensification events over the past few decades, and the leading explanation ties directly back to that first ingredient we talked about, ocean heat content. As sea surface temperatures climb, and critically, as that warmth extends deeper below the surface, storms have more consistent access to the kind of fuel that used to be more the exception than the rule. A storm forming over a shallow pool of warm water used to be self-limiting. It would churn up cooler water from below and choke off its own growth. When that warm layer runs deep, that natural break disappears. This doesn't mean every storm will explode overnight. It means the odds of it happening, storm after storm, season after season, are shifting in a direction that keeps meteorologists and emergency planners on edge. For the people actually in this storm's path, the practical takeaway is simple, even if the science behind it is complex. Don't wait for the storm to look scary before you act. By the time a storm looks catastrophic on satellite, on radar, in every dramatic photo shared online, the decision window to prepare safely is often already closed. The people who fare best in situations like this are the ones who treated last night's modest tropical storm advisory as a real warning, not a footnote. In the next several hours, all eyes are on two things: the eye wall replacement cycle and the track forecast. Storms that intensify this rapidly often go through what's called an eye wall replacement cycle, where an outer ring of thunderstorms forms around the original eye, gradually chokes off its fuel supply, and takes over as the new, wider eye wall. This process can temporarily weaken a storm, but it also often leaves the storm larger and, over time, capable of re-strengthening to an even higher intensity than before. It's one of the reasons meteorologists are cautious about declaring a storm's peak intensity too early. A storm that looks like it's weakening on paper might just be reorganizing itself into something bigger. The track forecast is the other critical piece. Steering currents, the broader atmospheric winds that push a storm along its path, will determine whether this system continues on a path that threatens a densely populated stretch of coastline or shifts enough to spare the areas currently under the highest alert. Even small shifts in the position of a subtropical ridge, sometimes just tens of miles in the upper atmosphere, can translate into track changes of 100 miles or more at the surface days later. This is why forecast cones exist as a range of possibility rather than a single confident line, and why residents in and around that cone, even those not dead center in it, need to take preparation seriously. What's certain is this: the storm that woke up overnight is not the storm that went to sleep. It has more energy, tighter organization, and a forecast trajectory that has real people making real decisions right now about where to go and what to bring with them. Meteorologists will be watching satellite loops obsessively over the coming hours, waiting for the next hint of an eye wall replacement, the next pressure reading from a Hurricane Hunter flight, the next shift in that ridge of high pressure that could nudge the track one way or another. Every one of those data points will refine the picture. But the core lesson of the last 12 hours is already locked in. Storms don't always give you a gradual warning. Sometimes they change everything while you're asleep. And when the atmosphere lines up the way it did last night, warm water, weak shear, abundant moisture, the only responsible move is to stop asking, will this get bad? And start asking, am I ready if it does? Stay with your local emergency management updates. Keep your phone charged. And if you're anywhere near the system's projected path, don't wait for the next scary headline to make your move. The storm didn't wait, neither should you. Stay safe out there, and we'll keep tracking this one as it develops.